One day in mid-1834, a group of Bunurong women were down at Point Nepean at a women's place, and they were taken by sealers that had pulled in through the heads. They're taken over to the islands of Bass Strait initially and deposited in the middle of nowhere, isolated, abused, assaulted, treated like dogs. Actually, the dogs of these men were more highly noted in their journals than the Aboriginal people that they were raping for children. And I know that's super intense to hear and it's super intense to say, but these are the facts, you know. One of those women was pregnant, and her name was Nundaguruk, and she later became known as Elizabeth Maynard. And she was my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. I mean, could you imagine such a thing, you know, being sort of stolen just one day while you're out of the shops and then deposited on an island that you've got no idea about where anything is. You have no history on the place. And the sealers would leave the women there, or in some cases just a woman alone in a sealer hut on a tiny little island, and take off sealing and come back, could be weeks, could be months later. For the first 30 years of my life, I did not know this story. We grew up in Tasmania, obviously, because the women were taken to Tasmania, and so in some lines it had been preserved as an oral history, in others it had been extinguished at some point. My grandmother was raised as a Palawa woman from Tasmania, and she knew her Palawa roots. And that was passed on to my mother, who passed that on to me. It was through a chance meeting with my now wife, who was living in Frankston at the time, arguably in the heart of Bunurong country, and eventually began to meet Bunurong people through her on Bunurong country. And the more I learned about that history, I actually found our family in there. And it's now widely known and accepted and understood. It's a really interesting place in that it's gone from being a really special cultural place to, over time, its uses have changed, you know. Eventually it ends up a fort involved in both wars and various other Defence Force uses. So it's gone from being this super protected, super sacred cultural landscape with stories over millennia to kind of being abused, for lack of a better term. But it doesn't take away from our connection to it. It's still an incredibly beautiful place, culturally, spiritually, and visually. As built and abused as it may have been for the last 150 plus years, it's still got beautifully intact sections. And some of our elders talk about what used to be a patchwork of flora that would exist there. Our people doing that, taking seeds from some of their favourite flowers and depositing them in the same spot over and over. Now, this is a beautiful place. It's a cultural place. It's a spiritual place. Bunurong country extends from the Werribee River around the bay, takes in all of Mornington Peninsula, takes in all of Western Port Bay, all the way down to Wilson's Prom. Obviously landscape plays a huge role in culture, and one of the ways Bunurong people can be defined is as saltwater people. There's not a beach in Bunurong country that you could go to that doesn't have a midden associated with it. The whole bay is a continuous midden, and you have to climb over that midden to get to the sand where you put your towel. Wherever you have rock that's exposed in a marine environment, you will generally have a midden deposit around the edge where people have made fires, cooked the shellfish, discarded the shell to one side, and those piles of shell over long periods of time, thousands if not tens of thousands of years, those piles grow into what even look to be hills sometimes from a distance. The oldest middens that we found around the bay, associated with the bay, are 8 to 10,000 years old approximately. On the back beaches they're much older, could be 20, 25, 30,000 years old. And you've probably walked over those middens yourself. When you get to Mount Martha, that part of the midden that would otherwise go all the way around the bay is exposed, and it's been exposed by cuts that have been made into the primary dune in order for beach boxes to be constructed. You can see it from a great distance if you're paying attention. There's some really sensitive middens there that are quite old and are quite deep, and they're dense, so it's not just a small event. People have been eating at this location for thousands of years. I see people when I see those lenses, and I see people just living largely at one with nature, with a much better balance of things than we've been able to achieve with all our wisdom of the age that we live in. And it's falling apart, and it's happening quickly, and it retracts about maybe a metre every couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised if I went back the next time to have a look and it was completely gone. They're not just piles of shell, and it's not just the intangible stuff that we feel as a part of culture and connection either. I think they've got something to offer the world, really. I'm really used to seeing this stuff just be left to disappear. It sort of cuts at your soul. That's what it feels like. But who do I complain to? Who do I explain it to? There's no number you can call. Like an injured wildlife number where you can say, here's something that can't speak for itself that needs help. And it's important to us because it's a part of what we're a part of. It's a part of your future and your past as well. I think we all make the mistake sometimes of thinking that Aboriginal culture is somewhere else, that it's not here right under where we're standing at this moment. You struggle to see past the built environment, and places you've been going for could be 10 or 20 years, turning right at the same intersection every day, not knowing that underneath that intersection is something truly significant, that not just for Bunurong people, but for any people living in the area that have an interest in history or this place. So Frankston probably has a lot of stories associated to it that have become a bit of a narrative to the place, I suppose, over a certain time period. And it's been a bit of a rough part of Melbourne back in the past, known as a bit of a dodgy, rough place, and somehow that's become the narrative for a place that has tens of thousands of years worth of really deep and spiritual and amazing stories, and so much knowledge and culture. Yet, just the last 50 to 100 years become the story of a place. It's crazy. Well, Frankston is connected to everything else in the Bunurong cultural landscape. And just north of Frankston, where Seaford sits today, there was a huge swamp, Karam Swamp, which was one of several great swamps on Bunurong country. And in its wettest periods, when the swamp was at its fullest, it used to extend all the way down to Frankston, where it had run into high ground there at the southern end of the township. And everyone knows the main intersection in Frankston, with the 4 pubs on the corner and the jetty across the street. Karam Swamp used to feed an outlet out into the bay, and Kananook Creek was that outlet. And Kananook meant sweet water, beautiful water, and it was some of the clearest water that you'd find anywhere. So it was renowned. It was tied to the swamp by way of story, a cultural story, a Bunurong story about the swamp being a mother again. This reoccurring theme of women and mothers as objects in the cultural landscape. And her babies, when they left her, left in certain paths away from her, and those paths became the creeks. And one of those paths, Kananook Creek, was a very special place to Bunurong people for that reason. So they would often camp across from the mouth of the Kananook, which is just on the start of that rise, south of Frankston. And they would dance and conduct ceremony in that location. And this was captured in the early settlers' journals at the time. Archaeological testing in the area for proposed developments has been able to sort of back that up by way of locating subsurface artefact scatters, essentially, stone tools. They're in the front yards and the backyards and underneath all of that development, sometimes in their thousands. Have chapters to that story. Don't just let the last chapter become the story of the place. And then with a footnote that says, Bunurong people have also been here for 40 to 60,000 years as well. Wonga is a 300 metre tall granite mountain on the peninsula. It was named by early settlers Arthur's Seat because it looked a little bit like another hill in England somewhere or something like that. The Bunurong people, Wonga is an ancestor spirit, a female ancestor spirit. Although it's a mountain and it seems to stand alone when you view it, it's very neatly tied in to everything else around it culturally. So Wonga is the mother of her daughter peaks Mount Eliza and Mount Martha. I feel largely insignificant standing on such a prominent feature in the landscape that has so much cultural currency behind it, so much gravity. We know the Bunurong people were up there watching ships come in the heads, and there were even accounts of ship captains recording that they were seeing with a telescope from the deck of their boat Bunurong people on top of Wonga, up to 300 people strong. So I think of those things when I'm up there, and I've told those stories to my daughter while we've stood in what we believe to be that very spot. And we try and see in our mind's eye 300 strong of our people up there, and traditional people that had lived that life prior to 1835. We live in these multiple worlds at one time. There'd be a big hole left in my daughter's life, I suppose, if she didn't understand that part of our history. So yeah, I see it as my responsibility to give her all the information that she needs and wants about who her family are, who she is, and what she's a part of, and all the beauty in that story, and the significance of it. Because it's going to be a big part of who she is. It's weaved through us as people. And I pass it on to her with all the excitement that I carry about it. So I just don't show her something that her nan's made and leave it at that. I give her the context and the backstory. All I can really hope is that she continues to learn, and she seems hungry to learn. And I can't expect any more than that. That's one of my cultural obligations, is to make sure that she's got the knowledge that she needs to answer not only her own questions as she goes through life, but questions that she gets from other people, and to explain things in a way that makes sense to her. And however she chooses to live her life is up to her, but it's really important that she knows of the strong women and the beautiful cultures that she comes from. "10,000 years ago, the bay was a valley, low-lying ground, a grassland that the Yarra River, the Bunurong, used to run through, and out through the heads over a giant waterfall. And there was a point in time where Bunurong people had lost their way. They were taking a little bit more than they needed, and they were taking too much tucker and not eating all the tucker, and they weren't maintaining their intermob relationships. And Bunja wasn't happy, so he flooded the bay, the favourite hunting ground, and let the water pour in. It just changed the whole landscape. I mean, imagine the bay emptied of water today. The reverse effect. Could you imagine what it would do to the city of Melbourne and how it would change the whole environment? And to know that it's their God who's displeased with them that's done that, it'd be deeply affecting. You'd struggle to have people's attention more than such a thing like that. It's as relevant to us today as it is to them at that time, or to any human on earth at any time, really, that if we don't put first the environment that protects us, we won't have much of a life. The more I learned about history, the more I understood that it seemed to be that the biggest issues were that people largely couldn't understand something different to themselves. It almost seemed like they were quite literally blind to each other's culture. Awesome, isn't it? I think if people had have known a little bit more about each other, things could have been very different, you know. If people were just the slightest bit accommodating of each other's differences, it could have been a far different history. The Macraes are a great example of that on the peninsula. The story of the Macraes' relationship with Bunurong people focuses mainly on Georgiana Macrae, who was the daughter, and they lived at the Macrae homestead at the foot of Wonga, and they had a long-term good relationship where, you know, there was respect and it was reciprocal, and people learned a lot about each other and just established genuine friendships. And, you know, that's captured in Georgiana's journal in quite some detail. Their family had brought over, I think it's a piano or a pianola, brought it over from Europe somewhere on a ship. And she writes of, you know, these Bunurong people sitting outside the window on a little bench on the veranda, listening to her play for hours at a time. And she said that it brought them much joy, that they loved it. And that bench is still there, next to that window. It's a story from a settler saying these people are great people and they become true friends. When you read it, it's not complex. It was just people being respectful, building a relationship like you would with any person over time. Things could have been different. It didn't have to be that way. And that's what's hard on the minds of a lot of Aboriginal people today. It's not about where we're at now, it's about what we're trying to digest that we know happened as well. And you can't undo that stuff. If we just keep going forward without actually really truly understanding what's happened in the past, then we're going forward in a risky way. I've always explained the sophistication and the beauty of Aboriginal culture and Bunurong culture to be that sacrifice of the individuals and the comfort of individuals for the greater good of the culture. The landscape defines a culture to a large extent, and the landscape around Melbourne is largely defined by the bay. Oh, we've all got our bay stories, haven't we? Swimming and laughing and walking, connecting with each other and nature. Making memories. I say get out and enjoy it, but just remember, the country gives to us all day, every day. And what it looks like in the future, it's up to us.